All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good time catching up. So, we're about to start our morning program. But before we do, um, just wanted to take a moment and ask that if programs like this mean something to you, that you consider making a donation to ZLMC. I've put in the chat box a link to our donations site on PayPal. And your donations make programs like Sunday Morning Zen, Commit to Sit, as well as all of the other classes and workshops that we just went over possible. And they're really sincerely appreciated. So while you're thinking about it, if you just take a moment and consider giving a donation, doesn't matter how large or small, it's all appreciated to the center so that we can continue this important work. All right, this morning we have a special treat. We have Chris DuSell, who's been a member of the center since I think 2010, and she's done a multitude of things for ZLMC. She served on the center's board of directors. She's participated as a meditation timekeeper. I think she was a steward of the study circle, women's circle, ethics circle, and she's a regular Sunday morning Zen speaker. She's also an empowered Zen Life Instructor and has worked with countless people trying to establish their practice. She's a real treasure and a great friend, and I'm very happy that she could be here this morning to give a talk. So thanks so much, Christine.
There we go. There we go. That was probably one of the best introductions I've ever gotten. I hope you recorded that so I can listen to it again. Yes, I've been a member of the Zen Center for just a little over 10 years. And that's when I started my meditation practice. I actually participated in a version of the foundations course that Michael mentioned during the announcements. I participated in that. From then on, I was just sort of really connected to this path, and started a formal meditation practice and have stuck with it. And it's really been an important part of my life. Over the years, I've given several Sunday talks, and I generally try to choose something that I'm interested in learning a little bit more of myself. So I present myself to you not as an expert on the Bodhisattva Vows, but as someone who is studying them and learning about them. And I find that actually by agreeing to talk at a Sunday Zen talk, it provides me with the motivation and incentive to go ahead and dive deeper into something that I'm interested in learning about. And then talking about it sort of, cements it a little bit further. I'm really hoping, that we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit about these Bodhisattva Vows. I'd like to try to build in some a little bit of comments and questions or whatever during my talk. So we'll see how that goes. So the Bodhisattva Vows, those of you who participated in the morning meditation, certainly chanted them at the end, right? Creations are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to transform them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to open them. The awakened way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Now, the title of my talk is Appreciating the Bodhisattva Vows. And when you appreciate, say, for example, a piece of art, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can really just sort of be in front of the piece of art and just enjoy it, absorb it in its fullness, without really analyzing any piece of it, but just sort of, being in its presence. And then there's another way of appreciating a piece of art, or art in general, which is to understand maybe the time and place when it was created, a little bit about the artist, maybe the kind of the medium they used, the kind of where it's at, where it's currently sitting, you know, where you're appreciating it, so you can sort of deconstruct it. And that's the kind of appreciation that I'm going to use today. I'm going to try to do a little bit of deconstructing of the Bodhisattva Vows and go through them line by line. I'm really an analytical person, and that's kind of where my mind goes, is to always analyze things. So that's the kind of appreciation that I want to talk about, is sort of how can we appreciate the fullness of these vows and these lines as we chant them. And then the second thing I wanted to say before I sort of jump into the actual different lines is just to say a word about the word vow. When I hear the word vow, I think of it in very religious terms. I think of priests take vows, nuns take vows, monks take vows. I'm none of those. I'm a lay person. You know, do I really take a vow? Do I really want to take a vow in that kind of sense? But, you know, when you look up the word vow in the dictionary, the dictionary says, you know, the word vow means a promise, a pledge, a personal commitment. Well, that's something we all do every day. You know, we make vows or commitments to eat more healthily. We make vows to exercise more, to be a better parent, to be a more loving partner, maybe to learn something new. We make these commitments or intentions to ourselves on a regular basis. And to me, that's really now what the word vow means. It's nothing more nor nothing less than kind of commitments and intentions that we make on a daily basis in our life. We're placing a stake in the ground and saying, I'm committed to this. So when we chant the vows, I think we want to be present to this commitment we are making. We want to be present to the words and their meaning, and we want to come to it, this Bodhisattva vows, we want to come to them with beginner's mind. You know, that we want to chant them being mindful. I grew up in a very traditional Protestant religion, and I remember the point at which I probably was maybe 5th or 6th grade, I don't really remember. But I remember when I was so proud because I knew the liturgy so well, I no longer had to think about it. I just could sing it, you know, and it had no meaning to me anymore. I wasn't mindful of what I was saying. It was just a routine words and melody that was coming out of my mouth. And we don't want to do that. I mean, we don't want to do that whether you're, you know, traditional Christian or any other kind of faith tradition. You know, when we say these things, when we chant them, when we sing them, we want to be mindful and bring beginner's mind to what we're saying. So what is a bodhisattva? For a lot of you that I'm seeing on this screen today, that is not a new concept for you. We talk about it here at the Zen Center, about being bodhisattvas. And the translation for bodhisattva is simply an enlightened being. It is the ideal of Mahayana Buddhism, which Zen is a part of. It's not a god, it's not a deity, it's rather a way of being that we can aspire to. And that way of being is being devoted to the welfare of all things. A person who has genuine concern for the suffering of others and desires to improve the welfare of others, to relieve suffering. And bodhisattvas are not simply interested then in their own awakening. Bodhisattvas are interested in the relief of suffering of everyone. Everyone. We're always looking for ways that we can serve, not for merit, not so that we're saved because we've done something good, but as an essential part of the path, the spiritual path to end suffering for ourselves and for others. And when I talk about the words, when I use the word suffering, when we use the word suffering here in this context, we are not simply talking about, you know, really tragic and significant suffering, say the suffering of an individual who is in hospice with very painful end-of-life disease. That certainly, it's included, it's absolutely included. But we're also talking about just the day-to-day suffering that each of us experiences, our daily annoyances, our daily frustrations, our daily irritations and resentments or angers. It's that whole range, that whole continuum. That's what's included when we use the word suffering. Okay, so that's important to keep in mind so that we don't sort of separate ourselves and say, well, I don't really have that much suffering in my life, or I don't really know that many people who have that kind of suffering. Because all of us have that sort of routine or regular suffering, which is the more daily kind that I'm talking about. So that's what a bodhisattva is. And you know, at this point I had asked Michael, there's 2 links that I want to provide in the chat box. And if Michael could go ahead and put the one in the chat box, that's from Lion's Roar. It's an article that I found that was written some time ago by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche about the Bodhisattva. And I just found it to be a marvelous article, and I wanted to have everybody have access to that. So you might want to go, once Michael's put that in the chat box, you might want to go there, open it so that you have it in your browser to look at later. So that's something that we're not going to look at it now, but I just wanted you to have that for later. So a bodhisattva, again, is someone who's committed to the well-being, the welfare, to relieving the suffering of beings in the world. So when we get to the Bodhisattva vow, the vows, when we chant or say the Bodhisattva vows, it implies that we're committing to this ideal. That instead of holding on to our own individual territory and defending it tooth and nail, caring only about our well-being, we become open to and care about the world that we're living in. We commit to being just as attentive, if not more so, to the welfare of others as we are to ourselves. Historically, the vows are first found in 6th century CE, and it was easy for me to find many different, though similar, translations of the vows. And I'd like to share just a few of them, and then we'll move into talking about each line. So I just at the beginning sort of read again the vows that we say here at the Zen Center. Let me just share a couple of others that I found. The many beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Greed, hatred, and ignorance rise endlessly, I vow to abandon them. Dharma gates are countless, I vow to awaken them. Buddha's way is unsurpassed, I vow to fully embody it. Here's another one. Suffering beings are numberless, I vow to liberate them all. Attachment is inexhaustible, I vow to release it all. The gates to truth are numberless, I vow to master them all. The ways of awakening are supreme, I vow to realize them all. And then finally, there's one other one that I really like, and it's, I found this one on the website of Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe. That's where Roshi Joan Halifax is. It's exactly the same as ours, except for the third line. So it's creations are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless, I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. So Robert Aitken, who was a Buddhist teacher who was well known and revered, says, I have heard people say, I cannot recite these vows because I cannot hope to fulfill them. Nobody fulfills these great vows for all, he says, but we vow to fulfill them as best we can. That is our practice. So that's the first thing that I think was really important for me to sort of understand again is, you know, this is a practice, just like our meditation is a practice. We don't have to worry about whether we can complete them, whether we can fulfill them or achieve them. But we have an intention and a practice of keeping them front and center in our minds. It's the aspiration and intent that orients us to the path of awakening. A bodhisattva does not get caught up in pride about her generosity in helping others, nor in beating herself up because she isn't perfect in her efforts. In other words, a bodhisattva we don't pat ourselves on the back, nor do we beat ourselves up. We just do what we can, when we can, without self-praise and without self-criticism. It's a practice similar to our meditation practice. So let's go ahead and start with the first line. Creations are numberless, I vow to free them. Or other variations that I read, the many beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Suffering beings are numberless, I vow to liberate them. Again, Robert Aitken. Beginning students commonly ask how they can honestly vow to save all beings. It sounds like missionary arrogance. Hu Ning, who was a seminal figure in Zen history, offers a response. You are saving them in your own mind. With this line, you are acknowledging and recognizing the suffering in the world and cultivating your aspiration for wisdom and compassion and your determination to practice it in the world as best you can. Jack Kornfield, who certainly most of us are familiar with, says, does this mean I'm going to run around and save billions of humans and trillions of other beings? When we think of our limited self, it is impossible. But when we make it an intention of the heart, then we understand. To take such a vow is a direction, a sacred purpose, a statement of wisdom, an offering, a blessing. When the world is seen with the eyes of a bodhisattva, there is no I and other. There is just us. And then finally, Geshe Sonam, who is another Buddhist teacher. At present, the affection we have for friends and loved ones is mixed with clinging attachment. Our aim is to develop an unbiased affection for all beings, which is not tainted by such attachment. If a single being is excluded from this affection, we are not doing Mahayana practice. It is difficult for us to even think in this way, let alone embody it in our actions. How worthwhile to try to arouse such thought and feelings for even a moment. So it would be easy to slip into thinking that we're focused on freeing others from their suffering because it's a moral good. And to be sure, that's true. I mean, when we see suffering, to help someone else is in fact a moral good. But this particular line to me is more about the cultivation of compassion, seeing the suffering in the world and having a desire to relieve it, again, without any thought of what it's going to do for me. Dalai Lama says about compassion, compassion is not a religious business, it's a human business. It is not a luxury, it is essential for human survival. Every tradition, I think every wisdom tradition points to this generosity, to love and compassion. So it's not something that's simply comes from a Buddhist perspective. And, you gotta give that some thought. If all the wisdom traditions and philosophical traditions have some element of compassion towards others, there's gotta be something to it, right? It's not just coming from nowhere. It's not just being made up by one or another. And we need to think about what that's about and how compassionate can we ask ourselves to be. If we really think about it, and if we really sit and meditate on it, and I know for myself this is becoming more and more apparent, I'm realizing that life is connected, that it's interdependent, that it's relational, and that we cannot be focused solely on relieving our own suffering to the exclusion of others. Buddhism would say that the end of suffering for ourselves involves, in large part, releasing or transcending the small self, ego, and appreciating our connection to others, our relationship to everything. A few weeks ago on a Sunday Zen talk, we had Roshi Wick. Maybe some of you heard him speak, and he talked about twisted karma. And that is, he said, our false sense of separation from everyone and everything else in the world. He said that whenever we create a sense of separation, we create evil, by which I believe he meant we sow more confusion, we sow more chaos, hurt, anger, and division in the outer world. We do harm when we're only focused on ourselves. You know, it's almost like trite at this point to say that the spread of COVID-19 has shown how connected we are, that country boundaries mean nothing to this virus, right? And as I'm sure others have also read, that experts are saying that it's important we keep this in mind as the vaccine rolls out. There was a piece in the Post, and now there's a piece in the Times about how the rich countries in the world are gobbling up all the vaccine, more than they need. And, you know, some other countries, developing countries, have none or almost none. And this kind of distribution, this kind of thinking to only take care of ourselves in this way, in a national sense, is going to come back to bite us. We're all connected. And if the world doesn't get safe, if the world doesn't get vaccinated, then it's going to hurt us in ways that we can't even perceive now, not only economically, but in other ways as well. But we have this way of thinking of only of ourselves. Focusing our attention on all sentient beings redirects our attention from the small self to this interconnected of life. We reduce our suffering by reducing the suffering of everyone. I will admit that I slip into thinking, well, maybe once I'm a bit further along in my own spiritual path, then I'll start thinking of other people. But I've got a lot of work to do myself. And and not only a lot of work, but I've got a lot of my own suffering. And I'd like to take care of myself first, thank you. And then at some future point when I'm feeling a little bit more stable in my spiritual path and my suffering has been reduced, maybe I can turn myself outward. That's just misguided thinking. That is just misguided thinking. Another teacher says the vow of the Bodhisattva is that she will not go into nirvana until every single suffering being has entered nirvana. One has to understand what this means. Our own awakening is not a personal triumph. We do not have to win a spiritual sprint. We are one mind. Awakening is to penetrate more and more deeply into this truth. The world is alive, and as long as there is suffering, then this living whole is shattered. Whether it is my suffering or the suffering of another, when seen from the perspective of the Bodhisattva, makes no difference. You know, just a quick personal story. Many years ago, I was working with a therapist when I was in a really tough spot personally. And I remember that I would almost always feel ever so slightly better when I left his office. I can remember getting in the car and just feeling a little uplifted. And it took me a while, but I finally recognized that part of what the therapist was doing was broadening my perspective and turning my perspective outward. It wasn't minimizing the personal challenges in my life that I had, but in a very real way, my suffering decreased when I could take the blinders off and open up to the rest of things that were going on in my world. And you know, that's a little different than talking about being a bodhisattva, because I wasn't at that point concerned about freeing others from their suffering, but I think it's an illustration of how suffering is reduced when we engage with the world. I know that I felt a little more steady, a little bit more emotionally resourced when I shifted my mental and emotional gaze from just me and what was going on with me to other connections that I had in the world. I do think it's important to note that this vow is not about what people should do, you know, from a moralistic or religious perspective. The concept of the Bodhisattva vow is not a way to measure whether we're good people or not. Instead, it's about just aligning ourselves with this notion that we are not ultimately separate and that helping others helps us. We sort of raise the whole boat, not just part of the boat. And also, I think I'd like to say that what we do to relieve the suffering of others need not be thought of in terms of grand gestures. You know, whether you give $1 to a homeless person, whether you listen and give emotional support to a family or friend who's having troubles, or whether you leave your multi-million-dollar estate to some charitable organization when you die, you know, these are all acts of saving all creations. I was just thinking, I walked to the Zen Center this morning, and as Michael said, we have a lot of snow today. But it's really, the temperature's really beautiful, and I only live about a mile away, and it was beautiful. But when I was walking, I passed people who were snow blowing, and it was clear they weren't just snow blowing their spot. They were doing the whole block. I saw some people digging out their car, and I saw somebody come from across the street and say, "Let me help you out." You know, these are Bodhisattva activities. How can we serve? Can we be of service? So it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be, and we should always try to think as big as we can, as expansively as we can. But let's not minimize the things that we can do in our daily lives as well. So with this line, we're vowing to free all beings from their suffering, from the smallest annoyances all the way up to the large, societal population issues that we have to deal with. So that's the first line. And I want to pause just for a moment to see if anybody has any other thoughts about Bodhisattva or about saving all sentient beings. And if you do, just unmute yourself and jump in. I can't see everybody, so you can just jump in if you have just anything to add or say.
Hi, my name is Yvette Washington.
Hi, Yvette.
Hi, it's a pleasure to meet you.
You too.
I see myself as chanting the Bodhisattva Vows from now on. I don't see an end to it. As of today, I would like to chant these vows on a regular basis. And I would like to I would like to be a Bodhisattva. I'm already a very kind, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm already a very kind person. And like you said, you give $1 to the homeless person. Not that you necessarily do that all the time, but when you feel moved to do that, you do it. Or you're kind, or instead of just giving your opinion when there's a dispute, you just let the other person have it, have the floor, just in your personal life with your family and friends, and just being nice to people. So I do it, but I think I can do more and be more conscious of the fact that I am doing this.
Thank you. Being mindful. You're talking about doing more and being mindful. And the fact that you aspire to be a Bodhisattva means you're a Bodhisattva. It's an aspirational path. We don't have to cross some particular line in the sand and where we were Bodhisattva, we weren't, and now we are. If we have the aspiration to be compassionate to others, we are on the Bodhisattva path. We are Bodhisattvas.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yvette.
You're welcome.
So I have a question. This is Chris, and I'm sorry my camera doesn't work today. So what do you do? I mean, if you don't mind sharing, what do you do in your personal life or in your work life or whatever to actually carry out the Bodhisattva vows? Because that's something I have a hard time with. I think that, I want to serve others. I want to be helpful to others, but then I get distracted, just like, okay, I got to wash the dishes, I got to make food for my kids, whatever. I don't feel like I act on it as much as I want to.
Yeah, I think, Chris, I can just speak for myself. I really think of all of so many of the Zen and Buddhist teachings as practices, and I'm not perfect at them, but I have to call them to mind, so if there are ways that you can call them to mind on a regular basis throughout your day, I don't know what that might be. It might be as simple as putting an alarm on your phone, and when the alarm goes off, you chant, you say the Bodhisattva Vows, or you just remind yourself of them. In your daily meditation practice, or whatever your meditation practice is, at the end, if you can chant the vows to yourself. All of these ways just sort of help us make these a practice, because it's a habit, and our habits are they don't currently necessarily include this way of thinking. So we have to figure out, well, how do I start any new habit? How do I start any new pattern of behavior that I want? What are the things that I do to embed that in my life, and then just use those same types of activities to embed this in your life? For me, it's not any more esoteric than that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for that question. So I'm going to move on, and I want to make sure that we get through all of these, but I hope to have some more comments as we go along. The first line calls on us to recognize the suffering of others. And in that vow, as I've said, we're identifying with the distress of all sentient beings. And it evokes our compassion. So compassion has elicited. And now we want to help other people, right? Or other beings. But if we just jumped in right there without any training of our mind, if we just jumped in with our untrained minds, I think we'd get in trouble pretty quickly. Our untrained minds lack wisdom. Our untrained minds are reactive, judgmental, driven by emotions, quick to anger. They can be narrow, opinionated, and we're just going to bring all of that to our effort to help somebody else. A lot of unskillful interactions will occur. Or we might bring a mind that is inclined to see compassion as people-pleasing, always turning the other cheek, avoiding conflict in situations where an individual really does need to be held accountable. So if we don't have any training of our mind and we want to help people, it's very possible that we'll do more harm rather than helping. So while the first vow is about others, to me, the next three vows are really about working with ourselves so that we can be of service, we can be of benefit to other human beings. So we take this second vow. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Greed, hatred, and ignorance rise endlessly. I vow to abandon them. Attachment is inexhaustible. I vow to release it all. So to come back to Robert Aitken, he says, this line expresses the aspiration to cut the tape of incessant chatter, the internal monologue that inevitably relates to how I am, how I was, or how I will be. In the silence that follows, one turns naturally to the well-being of others. And then back again to Chogyam Rinpoche. The only way to break the chain reaction of confusion and pain and to work our way outward into the awakened state of mind is to take responsibility for ourselves. If we do not deal with this situation of inner confusion, if we do not do something about it ourselves, nothing will ever happen. We cannot count on others to do it for us. It is our responsibility. And we have the tremendous power to change the course of the world's karma. So in taking this vow, we are acknowledging that we are not going to be instigators of further chaos and misery in the world, but we are going to be liberators, bodhisattvas, inspired to work on ourselves as well as with other people. So with this line, we're recognizing that to be of service to others, we need to become intimate with ourselves and realize the ways in which we can be confused, deluded, reactive in our own thinking, judgmental, and how this can harm others and ourselves. It's not just to recognize this in ourselves, but to work on changing that in ourselves, to work on releasing ourselves from these patterns, which may not be as skillful as we'd like. And I think our primary resource for doing this here is our meditation practice. Our primary method for learning to work with ourselves is through meditation. I think of my regular practice of meditation as generating a slow motion or pause button in my life. I can see, when I meditate regularly, and as I go throughout my day, as things happen, I can feel emotions arising. I can see the options that I have in front of me. I'm not as automatically reactive. Doesn't mean that reactivity isn't still there. It is still there. But I have some sort of a pause button or a slow motion button, which allows me not to go there, but to pause and think about which action I want to take. So I think that that's really key. And, in yesterday's Saturday morning, we do, after the meditation, we do a check-in. And both Robin and Tanya, I think both mentioned this same kind of thing happening in their meditation. That there's this opportunity to sort of be less reactive when we meditate. And then you have the option of choosing more skillful means in your interactions. So in this way, I can work on transforming my own delusion, anger, and ignorance. Since they are inexhaustible, the vow says they're inexhaustible, I will never be fully free of them. But my regular practice of meditation is an antidote, an effective treatment, so that I don't end up spewing my confusion, my reactivity, my chaos and fear and anxiety out on the rest of the world. At least some of the time, right? At least some of the time. And I think it's also important to know that it's important to talk just briefly, ever so briefly, about the need to guard against idiot compassion. So idiot compassion is sort of, I referenced it as like when we think we're giving compassion, when we're just letting people, when we're avoiding conflict, when we're letting people do whatever they want because that's a little bit easier to do. When we're sometimes turn ourselves into a doormat and let people walk on us. That's kind of idiot compassion. That's not true compassion. Compassion is wishing that beings be free from suffering and taking actions toward that end. Idiot compassion, on the other hand, is avoiding conflict, letting people walk all over you, not holding people accountable when they need to be. Idiot compassion is being nice or being good. It's not compassion at all. It ends up causing us pain, and it ends up causing others pain. It lacks both courage and intelligence, and I would say wisdom. It lacks wisdom. True compassion does not shy away from causing pain when necessary. Causing pain is not the same as causing harm. Now, we could spend a whole Sunday Zen talk on idiot compassion, but I think it's really, I just want to touch on it because I don't want people going away from this this morning thinking that you're just supposed to lie down and let everybody do what they want. That is not compassion, and we have to learn that. I have a hard time with this one myself, but there are times where it's important to hold people accountable. For yourself and for them. We cause more pain when we allow things to continue to go on. So with this line, we're committing to become more intimate with ourselves, to learn about our own operating manual. How do we operate? And the ways in which we contribute to our own and others people's suffering. Let me move on to the third line and then I'll open it up for some comments. I have this quote that I want to say, and I'm sorry, I don't remember, I didn't capture who it was from. It says the desire to liberate sentient beings, aid in the eradication of their distress, should not be an impulse based on idle sentimentality or romantic notions of spiritual life. This noble aspiration can only come to completion provided there is a strong foundation of wisdom. With wisdom only and not otherwise can one spread the Dharma and assist living beings. Just as there is immeasurable distress in the lives of sentient beings, there are innumerable methods of Dharma practice. Therefore, the third vow of great compassion states, Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to open them. Or, the gates to truth are numberless, I vow to master them all. Or reality is boundless, I vow to perceive it. To me, this line says that there are boundless opportunities to both cultivate and enact wisdom, compassion, and loving action. And the line reminds me of one of the classes in the Foundations course that we teach here. In one class, we talk about the notion of being open and teachable. And this line here in the Bodhisattva Vows is about the teachings and practices in our lives that help us to be more responsive, less reactive, more joyful, more comfortable with uncertainty and unknowing. To be open, we have to be receptive and teachable to recognize and make use of these opportunities. So in my mind, there are formal gates or entryways to knowledge and wisdom about the Bodhisattva, about Buddhism, about Zen, right? There are the precepts. There are the 6 perfections or paramitas. There's the 4 noble truths. There's the Eightfold Path. There's meditation practice and classes, individual study, study with a teacher. All of these are Dharma gates. All of these are gates to helping us understand the Dharma, which is knowledge or truth, wisdom. And then there is also your life. The question we ask in the Foundations class is, can you learn from your life? Can you be open and mindful and observant about what goes on in your life, in your mind, and learn from that? So, for example, every time you are mindful of a judgment, a critical judgment arising in you, for example, maybe this 24/7 family time is mostly good, but once in a while you're kind of tired of it. And you get a little bit cranky. If you can see that arising and catch it before you project it out to someone in your family, you work with it internally rather than lashing out, then I think you're fulfilling this line of this vow. If you can notice when you're feeling edginess or anxiety or fear, and you can give yourself some compassion, then I think you're being open and teachable, and you're fulfilling this vow of opening to the Dharma gates that are available. All of it, formal and informal, is rich with opportunity for us to open to a boundless reality, boundless of wisdom. And let me say a word about that, boundless reality. You know, we don't really see reality that clearly most of the time. Most of the time we see reality through our own filter, through our own rose-colored glasses, or maybe you have gray-colored glasses, I don't know. But that's what we see. There is so much more to reality. And that's what this vow is also about, is trying to open to that, trying to open to what's really out there rather than just the way that we see it ourselves. It's that opening the blinders again. You know, I read somewhere in one of the books I read a long time ago, it just came to me, is that sometimes it's like we look at the sky through a straw. That's what we see of reality, is what goes, but the sky, of course, is just so much bigger than that. Reality is so much bigger than that. So there are so many opportunities for us to learn. And can we be open to that? This is about practicing mindfulness, not only during your time on the cushion, but throughout your day, over time. It will create space for seeing both yourself and the outer world with more clarity and wisdom. And when we see the world with more clarity and wisdom, we open space for more loving actions. So let me stop for just a few minutes and see if anybody has any comments or thoughts about the middle two lines. The one about delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to transform them, or Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to open them. Does anybody have any comments or questions or additions that they would add? Corrections that they might add?
I was thinking about the line, delusions are innumerable. I bow to, what was the statement? I bow to that.
Transform.
All right. When you said that, I thought to myself, I need to have a practice, a meditation practice, so that I'm clear within myself, so that I'm not caught in all these illusions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Chris, Mark here.
Yeah.
Genzan Kinnell, who spoke to us, I think during the summer, likes Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them.
Mm.
And I really like that too, because it's so active. It really helps me embody the responsibility when I think about it that way. And also when I was thinking about the gateless, I've been looking at koans again and was thinking about the gateless gate. And one of the translations of the word, of the title of that gate, the gateless gate, the Denkaroku, is also gateless barrier. You know, we drive through that barrier, and of course the barriers are our own lives. So I really like how you're taking this, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Let's just wrap this up with the last line, and then if there are other comments, we'll have time for those. And so we move to the final line in the Bodhisattva vow. The awakened way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Or other versions, Buddha's way is unsurpassed, I vow to fully embody it. The ways of awakening are supreme, I vow to realize them all. I think this final line is about how we live and how we practice in our lives. Being mindful about our thoughts, being mindful about our words, being mindful about our actions. One source said that this final line is a vow to walk the Eightfold Path of the Buddha, a vow to walk the Eightfold Path of the Buddha as rigorously and as nobly as he did. And of course, the Eightfold Path is about having right understanding, thought, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. I think it could also be about practicing the precepts, practicing the six perfections. It's basically about practicing or embodying a wholesome, skillful, mindful life, right? So that we're not totally lost in our delusions throughout the day, that we are mindful about what's going on for us in our bodies and in our minds. We're mindful about what we're doing. And it doesn't mean that we're always going to act on our wonderful things that come up in our mindfulness, you know? I can be mindful about, you know, just to be silly, I can be mindful about the fact that I'm about to have my 5th cookie. And maybe that shouldn't happen. And I'm still go ahead and do it, right? I mean, we're not perfect. This is not about perfection. But the more that we're mindful about ourselves and our behaviors, our thoughts, we have a greater chance of reducing our suffering and the suffering of others. You know, Buddhism talks about doing good and not doing harm. This is the way of the Buddha. This is the awakened way that reduces suffering for ourselves and others. So it's embodying, this particular line means let's do it. Let's really practice this vow. Let's not just make it an intention of our head, but let's really practice it. So in closing, I'd like to share another translation of the Bodhisattva vows that were phrased as values that might resonate with some of you. So this individual wrote the Bodhisattva Vows in this way: I value a spirit of service, doing what I can, when I can, in the amount I can, to make positive contributions to the world and beings everywhere. I value noticing when I get caught up in my own stories, and I value returning to kindness and making mindful choices. I value welcoming opportunities to learn and grow, even though they may be scary, difficult, or painful. And I value trying to live my values as best I can, knowing I will never be perfect. So I really liked those. It's almost like the vows are put more into sort of a Western way of thinking or talking, to that end, I also would like to ask Michael, if he hasn't already, to put in the chat box a link to a Jack Kornfield link that you could look at later. It's a really nice short piece about the Bodhisattva Vows, but at the end of this little piece, he encourages us to write our own Bodhisattva Vows, that we can come up with words that are inspiring to us. And that can, for some of us, maybe resonate more because they are words that we think about and we create. And he encourages that in that link. So that's worth reading as well. One final version is from Shanti Deva. Shanti Deva's work includes a number of beautiful prayers that are also Bodhisattva vows. This is one that comes up over and over when if you do any kind of Google searching on Bodhisattva vows. May I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. So we have about 10 minutes left. If there are any comments or questions, that is what I have. And again, go ahead, Yvette.
I have a question. I would like that material that you read from before you gave us the link for Jack Kornfield a few seconds ago. Was that Jack Kornfield?
What I just read, the Shanti Deva.
Before Shanti Deva and before you gave us the link to Jack Kornfield, you summed up, you gave a description.
The values.
Okay.
Values. I don't have those with me I don't have that link with me right now, but I don't know. We'll try to figure out a way to get that out.
Thank you.
Make a note of it.
Thank you, Ms. DuSell.
Sure. Oh, thank you for getting my name right. Any other comments? Some people can just unmute themselves. And if not, I'm happy to have everybody get a few extra minutes to their Sunday morning.
Well, I wanted to say something. That was such a wonderful talk. Thank you, Chris. And you know how they all work together, those vows. I mean, they're huge, but I think, you know, when we can really, truly like be aware of ourselves, what we're thinking, you know, the trance of unworthiness that we also talk about in our classes, our foundation classes, you know, we can really be kind in our thoughts to ourselves, then it naturally spreads out to others, right? And that's embodying that awakened way when you are with reality here. You don't have a story about yourself that you're unworthy. And, you know, reality is, and you can live that reality. So thank you very much for that.
And thank you. I appreciate you sort of bringing that back around, because that's kind of the interesting thing about Buddhism for me is that like these vows talk about really putting our emphasis on other people. But what June is saying is really true too. When we are compassionate with ourselves, we naturally are more compassionate with other people. And I really didn't believe that until I saw it working in my own life. That somehow when I started to get a little more compassionate with myself, I had the ability to say, oh, this person too wishes to be happy. You know, I was just able to do that more easily. So thanks for bringing that around to that. Okay, it looks like it's time for you to go out and shovel snow if you live in Chicago. And if you don't, well, good for you. Robert, I know, Schwach, I know you don't have to, sitting there down in Mexico. Anyway, it's good to see all of you. I miss all of you very much. I wish we could be together, but this is the next best thing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. You headed out of the park.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Wonderful talk.
Great talk, guys.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. DuSell.
Thank you.
Now, how do we save this?